Welcome to the channel, everyone! Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Whether you're here to learn something new, get inspired, or just relax and enjoy some great content, I'm really glad you're here. On this channel, I'll be sharing exciting stories, useful insights, and valuable tips that I hope will make your day a little better every time you watch. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. All right, let's get started. Imagine being thrust into the most important diplomatic mission of your life with only 2 days to prepare, all because your boss got the flu and you were the only person left to fill the seat. What would you do? For Ethan Vale, it was a one-way trip to the planet Vera, a world whose descent felt less like landing and more like sinking into a glowing purple ocean. Pressing his face to the cool window, he watched space give way to a shimmering violet light that seemed to hum right through the ship's hull. He'd seen 6 worlds in his 10 years as a language consultant, but Vera was different. It wasn't a concrete jungle or a chaotic farm world. Below him, the capital city rose from a vast network of islands, its buildings like crystals growing from a sea that perfectly reflected 2 moons. The entire planet glowed. The city's design was so beautiful it was scary, like a cathedral spun from starlight and glass. Bridges made of solid, pulsing light connected everything, beating like the city's heart. Ethan tugged at the collar of his formal uniform. The fabric felt stiff and suffocating. At 34 years old, he was a genius with language, but he felt like a toddler being asked to solve a complex physics problem. He was just a low-level envoy, a warm body sent by the United Earth Coalition to keep a seat from getting cold. "Don't stare at the light for too long," his training officer had warned him. "The Veyron build with materials that react to thoughts. The city responds to how everyone is feeling. If you stare too hard, it starts staring right back at you." The shuttle docked with a quiet hiss, and the vibrations stopped instantly. Ethan gripped his datapad, his knuckles turning white. He took a shaky breath. He'd read the files, memorized details about the Council of Harmonies and the resonance priests who could literally sing a person into a coma. But the most terrifying rumor was that the Veyron could smell your intentions like a scent in the air. If he was scared, they'd know it. The door slid open. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It wasn't the sterile, recycled air from the ship or the thick, earthy scent of a jungle world. It smelled like a lightning storm and fresh flowers, sharp and electric. A group of aliens waited for him on the glossy black platform. They were tall and slim, with skin like polished pearl and huge, pupilless eyes that swirled with color like oil on water. "Welcome to Vera," the leader said. The voice didn't come from a translator. It echoed inside his own head, a strange hum that vibrated against his teeth. "I'm honored to stand within your light," Ethan replied, reciting the formal greeting he'd practiced for 40 straight hours on the trip over. The alien tilted its head. "Your pronunciation is acceptable," the Veyron noted, its voice flat and without emotion. "But your anxiety is deafening. It tastes like rust and static. Please follow us. We can't be late for the resonance gala." The walk to the palace was a dizzying assault on his senses. The walls seemed to pulse with light, shifting from a soft blue to a warm amber as they walked by. Ethan tried to empty his mind by counting prime numbers, anything to keep his heart from pounding out of his chest. But the sheer alien beauty of the place made it impossible. He felt like a dirty footprint on a perfect white rug. The gala was held in a hall so massive it could have had its own weather. The ceiling was a live, holographic projection of the galaxy slowly turning. Hundreds of Veyron drifted through the hall in perfect, synchronized movements, their robes shimmering like liquid silver. The air itself was filled with a low, melodic hum, a single, constant musical note that felt like it was holding the very building together. Ethan hid next to a pillar made of solid light, clutching a glass of water he was too terrified to drink. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him. He was the only human there, a dull beige spot in a swirling kaleidoscope of color. "Envoy Vale," a voice boomed. Ethan turned to see a high-ranking official walking towards him, flanked by 2 guards in armor that looked like it was carved from beetle shells. The official was holding a delicate glass filled with a thick, swirling gold liquid. "I am High Minister Kalin," the official announced. "To welcome you to the Council of Harmonies, we offer you the nectar of the first chord. Drink, and let our wavelengths align." Ethan's blood ran cold. His briefing had covered bowing, greetings, and who to make eye contact with, but there was absolutely nothing about a special welcome drink. In human culture, refusing a drink was a major insult, and he figured it was probably the same here. The last thing he wanted was to cause a diplomatic crisis 5 minutes after arriving. He took the glass. It felt warm. "To Harmony," Ethan said, faking a confidence he absolutely did not feel. He tilted the glass to his lips and downed the entire thing in one go. It tasted like honey, spices, and a mild electric shock. And the reaction from the room was immediate. The constant melodic hum of conversation just stopped. Every Veyron within 50 feet of him froze in place. The High Minister's eyes, which had been a calm blue, flashed to a horrified shade of violet. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, like the sharp intake of breath right before a scream. Ethan slowly lowered the now empty glass, his confident smile frozen on his face. A horrible, sinking feeling washed over him. He had just done something very, very wrong. The High Minister stumbled back, raising his hands as if to ward him off. "You accept?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "You accept the binding?" Ethan tried to speak, but his mouth was completely dry. He started. But before the minister could scream for the guards, a hand gently wrapped around his arm. It was cool and firm, with a surprising strength in its slender fingers. "Oh, calm down, Kalin," a woman's voice cut through the silence like a diamond. It was sharp, musical, and filled with humor. "You know, humans have the digestive finesse of a garbage disposal. He thinks it's just a welcome drink. Look at the poor man. He's terrified. He probably thinks he just drank poison." Ethan turned to see his rescuer. She was breathtaking. She was a little shorter than the other Veyron, with hair that floated around her head like she was underwater, constantly shifting from silver to deep blue. Her dress was a wild design of sharp angles, cut in a way that showed off the glowing patterns on her collarbones. But her face was what truly captured him. She had a smile that was too clever to be innocent, and eyes that looked like they could read his mind. "Lyra Saurin," the High Minister said, his voice a mix of respect and annoyance. "This is a sacred ritual. He drank the draught of eternal unification. He just proposed a soul bond to me." Lyra let out a laugh that sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. "And I'm sure you're flattered, Minister, but look at his aura. It's not golden with desire, it's gray with pure confusion. He wasn't proposing. He was just thirsty." She turned back to Ethan, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You're only supposed to take 1 sip, Envoy," she explained. "Then you pour the rest onto the ground to show you respect the earth as much as the spirit. By drinking the whole thing, you basically announced that you want to consume the other person's soul and merge your minds for all eternity." Ethan felt all the color drain from his face. "I didn't know," he stammered, looking back at the horrified minister. "I deeply apologize. I did not intend to merge with you." Lyra patted his arm, letting her hand linger for a moment. "Come on, Envoy. Let me give you the tour before you accidentally declare war on us by sneezing." She gracefully guided him away from the stunned officials, parting the crowd like the bow of a ship. Ethan couldn't help but notice how the other Veyron reacted to her. They moved out of her way instantly, bowing their heads. It was more than just respect. He could feel a sharp edge of fear. She was clearly powerful. They found a quiet balcony that overlooked the glowing city. The air was cooler out here, and a special field muffled the noise from the party. Ethan leaned against the railing, finally letting out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since he left orbit. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet. "I think I almost started an interplanetary war back there." "Almost?" Lyra leaned against the railing next to him, studying his face. "You just offered to mentally marry the Minister of Agriculture. It would have been a dreadfully boring union. He thinks about nothing but crop yields and rainfall patterns." She took a sip from a glass of clear liquid she'd snagged from a floating tray. "You're Ethan Vale, the language prodigy." "I'm hardly a prodigy," Ethan mumbled. "I'm just a good listener." "And you're a terrible liar," Lyra said, her playful tone suddenly gone. It was replaced by a sharp, analytical focus. "I can taste your relief. It's sweet, like fruit that's a little too ripe, but underneath it, there's a deep, cold loneliness." Ethan was stunned by the sudden change. He knew the Veyron could sense emotions, but this felt different. This felt like she was reading the notes scribbled in the margins of his soul. "What do humans do?" she asked. "When you're lonely and surrounded by strangers? When it gets too quiet? Do you sing? Do you try to bond with someone?" Ethan looked out at the impossible, glowing city, and, for a reason he couldn't explain, he decided to be completely honest. "We pretend," he said. "We act like we're exactly where we're supposed to be. We put on a smile and just wait for the feeling to go away, or we try to drown it out with noise." Lyra just stared at him, the glowing patterns on her skin pulsing a slow, steady blue. "You pretend," she whispered, as if tasting the word. "How exhausting." But before the moment could go any deeper, the loud, heavy sound of a gong echoed from the main hall. Lyra's expression immediately hardened. The mask of the playful, charming host slammed back into place, but her eyes were now as cold as deep space. Imagine being the one person in a room of 1,000 powerful aliens, and all of them hate your guts. That was my Tuesday. I'm Ethan, and I was sent to make peace, but their leader, Chancellor Kor, looked at me like I was a piece of trash he was about to sweep away. He stood there, ancient and imposing, and his voice echoed through the hall, calling humanity a chaotic frequency, a dissonance. He basically told everyone I was a disease. Stick around, because you won't believe how this one lone human turned the tables on an entire alien empire, and the secret weapon I found was the last thing anyone expected. The Chancellor accused us of hoarding our emotions, of being emotionally contaminated. He asked his people, "Can we negotiate with those who cannot even hear the music of their own souls?" The crowd murmured, and I could feel their hostility wash over me like a heat wave. The air got thick, and it felt hard to breathe. Beside me, my official escort, Lyra, leaned in close, her whisper cutting through my fear. "Smile, Ethan," she said. "Don't let him see he's getting to you. If you crack now, you've already lost." I forced myself to stand taller, looked that old tyrant right in the eye, and held his gaze. I didn't bow. I didn't even blink. After a long, tense moment, he just dismissed me with a look and turned away. "Let's just hope," he announced to the crowd, "that the human can learn to sing before he breaks our song." The rest of the night was a total nightmare of cold shoulders and thinly veiled insults. By the time I was locked in my guest suite, my head was throbbing. The room was fancy, with walls that looked like a forest at sunset, but it was just a gilded cage. 2 guards were posted right outside my door, and I was told not to even think about wandering. I tossed my jacket on the bed, splashed some cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. I looked pale, scared, and completely out of my league. I decided to check the door, just in case. As I got closer, I froze. There, burned right into the metal frame at eye level, was a tiny symbol. It was smaller than my thumb, a swirling, intricate pattern that hadn't been there when I walked in. The longer I looked at it, the more it seemed to pull my gaze inward. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my skull, like a nail being driven behind my eyes. The symbol started to spin, drilling into my vision. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The pain got worse, white-hot and blinding. Just then the doorbell chimed, snapping me out of the trance. I staggered backward, gasping for air and rubbing my temples. "Come in!" I managed to croak out. The door slid open, and there was Lyra, holding some small metal gadget. She looked around my room with a fake smile. "Nice place," she said. "A little stuffy, though, no personality." My head was still pounding. "What do you want?" I asked. "And what in the world is that thing on my door?" Lyra glanced at the burn mark and just shrugged. "Oh, that? Think of it as a welcome gift from the Chancellor's personal goons. It's a mild neuroglyph. It's designed to make you compliant, a bit more agreeable. Stare at it long enough, and you'd probably sign away your planet's oceans just to make the headache go away." I was speechless. "They're using psychological warfare on a diplomat?" She smirked. "They call it decorative deterrence." Then she moved toward me fast, reached up, and tapped the collar of my shirt. "Hold still," she said before I could react. She slipped a thin, cold disc under my collar against my skin. It buzzed for a second, and then just blended in with the fabric. "What was that?" I demanded, stepping back. "A surveillance scrambler," she said, her grin back in full force. "The council listens to everything. The walls literally have ears. That little guy creates a feedback loop. From now on, all they'll hear from this room is the soothing sound of a cow chewing its cud." "You're making fun of me," I said, completely bewildered. "I'm saving you," Lyra shot back. "And myself. It's called being efficient." She walked over to the window and looked out at the glowing alien city, and for a moment her playful attitude vanished. I could see the tension in her shoulders. "You shouldn't be here, Ethan," she said softly. "Chancellor Kor isn't just putting on a show. He wants this treaty to fail. He needs an enemy to keep his people united." I had to ask, "Then why are you telling me this? You're one of them. You're part of his inner circle." Lyra turned around, and for the first time, I saw a deep sadness in her eyes. "I am what they made me," she said quietly. "That's not the same as being one of them." As if on cue, the lights in the room flashed a blinding red. A blaring siren started to wail, a horrible sound that vibrated in my bones. My datapad buzzed on the bed. I grabbed it. It was an emergency alert. "Shuttle Alpha 9 has detonated in low orbit. Casualties confirmed." It was my shuttle, the one I arrived on. "The crew?" Lyra asked, her voice sharp. "Gone," I whispered. The whole room shook from the shockwave. "It started," Lyra said, grabbing my arm. "We have to go, now." "Wait," I said, tapping my ear. My universal translator was making a high-pitched screech, and then the noise stopped. It was replaced by a voice, not a computer, but a real voice, whispering directly into my brain. "You are a parasite," it hissed inside my head. "You are broken. Submit." I clawed at my ear, trying to dig it out. "Get it out of my head!" I yelled. Lyra grabbed my hands, holding them down. "Don't fight it," she commanded. "It's a psychic attack. They're trying to make you panic. If you run out there screaming, they'll shoot you on sight and claim it was self-defense." She pulled me toward a wall, not the door. She pressed her hand against a spot that looked completely solid. "Where are we going?" I asked, my vision starting to swim as the voice kept whispering horrible things. "Somewhere they won't think to look," Lyra answered. The wall panel slid open with a hiss, revealing a dark, narrow service tunnel that smelled like ozone and dust. "Come on, diplomat," she said, yanking me into the darkness. "Try to keep up. I'd really hate to have to carry you." We ran through the guts of the palace, a maze of cramped tunnels filled with humming cables and strange pipes. It was nothing like the beautiful halls above. Lyra moved like a shadow, fast and agile, while I stumbled behind her. She kept making nervous jokes to fill the silence, but I saw her hand tremble every time she stopped to check which way to go. She was just as scared as I was. "They're sweeping the entire grid for us," she whispered, pulling me into a dark corner as a security drone flew past. "If Core finds us, there won't be a trial. He'll just say you attacked him and that will be the end of it." I leaned against the cold wall, trying to breathe. "Why?" I asked again. "Why are you helping me? You could turn me in and be a hero." She looked at me in the dim light, her eyes wide. "Because I'm tired of the song," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm tired of everyone singing the same old lie." She grabbed my hand. "We're close." We went down a long, spiral ramp, deep into the foundation of the palace. The air grew cold and crackled with static. The walls down here weren't crystal. They were made of a dull black stone that seemed to drink the light. Finally, we hit a dead end. A solid wall of that black stone. But Lyra just faced the wall, closed her eyes, and started to hum. It was a strange, sad melody that I could feel vibrating in my chest. Slowly, impossibly, the stone wall began to ripple like water. It turned see-through, then parted like a curtain, revealing a gleaming silver door that hadn't been there a second ago. Lyra turned to me, all her jokes and sarcasm gone. She looked completely vulnerable. "This is it, Ethan," she said. "This is the threshold. Behind this door is the one place the council can't see or hear. It's where the truth is kept." She took a step closer. "The Chancellor is afraid of our emotions because he can't control his own. In here is the proof, the record of his own dissonance, his fear, his rage, everything he claims humans are guilty of. I'm not just offering you a place to hide, Ethan. I'm offering you the weapon that can win this entire fight. Together, we are going to broadcast his hypocrisy to the entire planet." For the first time since I'd arrived, I smiled a real smile. We were going to change the song, all right. And our new version was going to be a whole lot louder. Imagine being the one honest man in a galaxy of mind readers, each one a more practiced liar than the last. That was Ethan's life as a diplomat. But when the mysterious Lyra offered him the truth, a weapon more dangerous than any blaster, he knew he had to take the chance. He told her, "I'm with you." He didn't trust her politics, but in a world of psychic static, she felt real. What he found behind her secret door wasn't a command center, but a trap for the soul. Stick with me to see if he can escape it. The door sealed with a gasp, plunging Ethan into a darkness so thick it felt like velvet against his skin. He was standing on what looked like a solid floor, but when he looked down, he saw an endless, starless void. It was like standing on a frozen piece of midnight. "Relax, diplomat," Lyra's voice echoed from everywhere at once. "It's not a dungeon, it's a canvas." And just as she said it, the darkness began to shift as tiny glowing particles drifted into the air like a captured galaxy. They glowed in soft amber and deep indigo. But when Ethan's heart started pounding, the lights flared into an angry, anxious red. He froze, watching his own fear light up the room. "It reacts to you," Lyra explained, stepping out of the shadows. The lights swirled around her like tiny, glowing pets. "This is a noetic chamber. You humans build rooms out of brick and steel to keep the weather out. We build our rooms out of psychoreactive resin to keep the feelings in." Ethan slowly turned, completely bewildered. There were no walls, no furniture, just shifting shadows. As Lyra went to sit, the floor itself rose up to form a perfect chair beneath her. "I thought you said this was a secret room," Ethan said, his voice tight with suspicion. "I did," Lyra corrected smoothly. "And I said I would teach you pleasure. You just assumed that meant a mattress and some wine. That's the problem with your species, Ethan. You think intimacy is something you do with your bodies. For us, the body is just the antenna. The signal is everything else." The floor molded into a seat behind Ethan, and he sat down stiffly. So what is this place? Some kind of high-tech therapy session? Lyra's sharp smile faded, replaced by a deep weariness. Originally, yes. These chambers were for healing. A mother who lost a child could come here and sit in the memory of them until her grief softened. It was beautiful. The lights around her dimmed to a bruised, sorrowful purple. But the council, she continued, her voice hardening, realized that a room that can replay love can also rewrite loyalty. They turned these healing rooms into interrogation cells. She looked him dead in the eye. They don't use torture, Ethan. Torture is messy. They use this. They adjust your internal frequency until obedience feels like ecstasy. A cold dread washed over Ethan. That's why the Chancellor looked at me like I was a broken instrument, he whispered. He wants to tune me. Precisely, Lyra said. And we are here to inoculate you. She walked toward him, the lights parting to make a path. I'm going to show you how to open your mind without letting them inside, she said, her voice low. But we have to have rules. The first rule is consent, spoken aloud and unambiguous. If you want to stop, you say stop, and the link breaks instantly. No games. I refend to become what they are. Do you understand? Ethan nodded, his throat dry. I understand. She held out her hand. Then tell me, she whispered. Tell me I have permission to touch your thoughts. He looked at her hand, then at her defiant, waiting face. This was either the biggest mistake of his life or his only way out. You have permission, he said. Lyra placed her palm against his chest, right over his heart. And then he felt it. A warmth that bloomed inside his bones, bypassing his skin entirely. He gasped as the feeling spread through his nervous system like sinking into a warm bath. Breathe, Lyra's voice echoed, not in his ears, but inside his own head. Just float. Images flooded his mind, memories that weren't his. He felt the warmth of a blue sun on his face and tasted a fruit that was both sweet and peppery. He felt a profound sense of belonging, of being loved so completely it made his heart ache. It was pure intimacy, distilled into a feeling. It was more naked than being naked. He could feel Lyra's presence in his mind, a curious light dancing around his defenses. You're so loud, her thought voice murmured. Your mind is a storm of calculations and threat assessments. It must be exhausting to be you. He tried to put his mental walls back up, but the warmth had turned them to dust. Is this what you do? He managed to say out loud. This is what we are, she replied, and her thought tasted of salt water and sadness. But I'm not just showing you this to dazzle you. I'm showing you the mechanism. Her other hand hovered near his temple. The warmth spiked. I am a key, Ethan, she confessed, her thought jagged with guilt. The council realized my resonance is stronger than most. I can push through barriers. Ethan looked up and saw tears in her eyes. You read minds for them. I open them, she corrected, her voice breaking. I go in, find the secrets, and lock the door behind me. I've been their weapon since I was a child. The lights in the room swirled in a violent storm, mirroring her confession. She was risking everything just to show him the truth. She was handing him the very weapon they used, hoping he wouldn't use it against her. He reached up and pushed back, not with his hand, but with his mind. He projected a feeling of safety, of a stone wall, not as a prison, but as a shelter. I believe you, he said. The room suddenly erupted in a soft, golden light, responding to the harmony between them. And in that moment, they hatched a plan. It was insane. It was terrifying. But it was the only way. The plan was simple. Ethan would let the Chancellor try to tune him. But this time, Lyra would be linked to him, acting as a secret mirror. The next day, Ethan faced the Chancellor. As the tuning began, he felt the familiar, greasy probe of the Chancellor's mind. But then, he felt Lyra's strength join with his. Together, They didn't just block the intrusion, they reversed it. Instead of reading Ethan's mind, the Chancellor was suddenly flooded with the raw, screaming agony of the pilot from the chamber. And not just him. Lyra opened the channel wide, and every member of the council felt the pain of every mind they had ever broken. They were drowned in a tidal wave of their own cruelty. The psychic scream brought the entire system crashing down. In the chaos, Ethan and Lyra slipped away. They found an old, forgotten resonance chamber on a distant moon, and for the first time, they used it not as a weapon or a shield, but as it was intended, for healing. Sitting together in the calm blue light, they learned that the greatest power in the universe wasn't controlling minds, but in having the courage to share one. The man's face was a mask of pure, undiluted terror. Looming over him stood 3 tall figures in high-collared robes, council members. They weren't even touching him. They were singing. It was a low, grinding chant that made Ethan's teeth ache, even through the recording. With every note, visible wisps of light, shimmering strands of silver and blue, were being pulled from the man's chest. "They're harvesting him," Lyra said, her voice flat and empty, even as the room around them wept with shimmering, rain-like sparks. "They're siphoning his fear, his adrenaline, his desperation. To the council, these aren't just feelings. They're resources. They're drugs." Ethan shrank back, pressing himself deeper into the chair. The sight of the pilot was sickening. It was a violation of the soul. "Stop it," Ethan said. "Turn it off." Lyra clenched her fist, and the image dissolved into smoke. "That is the cost of your so-called peace treaty," she said, her breathing heavy. "The council doesn't want your trade goods. They don't care about your technology. They want livestock. They want access to human minds because your emotions are so volatile. You feel with a chaotic intensity my people lost centuries ago. To them, a human is just a battery of raw sensation, waiting to be tapped." She turned away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "I helped them design the extraction protocols," she whispered. "I thought we were curing mental illness." "I didn't know what they were really doing until it was too late." Ethan pushed himself to his feet. The dizzying, dark floor tried to throw him off balance for a moment, but he found his footing. He walked over to where Lyra stood. She was trembling, the bioluminescence on her skin flickering like a faulty light. He didn't grab her or offer some empty platitude. He just stood beside her, close enough for her to feel his body heat, and spoke into the silence. "You're showing me this now," he said. "That tells me you're not part of the machine. You're the wrench in the works." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "You're a strange diplomat, Ethan Vale. You see a monster and offer it a seat." "I see a woman who's terrified of her own power," Ethan replied. "And I know exactly what it's like to be used by a government that sees you as a glorious asset instead of a person." He lifted his hand, letting it hover just inches from her cheek. The very air between them crackled with static. It was a closeness that tested boundaries, breath held near breath. He could feel the ghost of her unique energy reaching out, wanting to close the distance, wanting to collapse into the comfort he was offering. But he didn't close it. He let the space remain, respecting the rules she'd laid out. Intimacy comes first, physics second. A shaky laugh escaped Lyra, breaking the tension just a little. "You're doing it again," she said. "Doing what?" "Projecting," she replied. "You're projecting that stubborn moral superiority of yours. It tastes like mint and old books." Ethan finally cracked a smile. "I've been told I'm an acquired taste." He took a step back, trying to inject a little lightness into the air before the sheer weight of it all crushed them. "Okay, I just want to make sure I'm fully understanding the stakes here. You're saying the Council's big plan is to turn all of humanity into a psychic, all-you-can-eat buffet?" "Essentially," Lyra said, wiping at her eyes. "Well," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck, "I have to say, That really gets my goat." Lyra froze. The shifting lights in the room came to a dead stop. She stared at him with an expression of absolute, bewildered horror. What?" she asked. Ethan blinked. "It gets my goat. You know, it really ticks me off." Lyra's expression didn't shift. "You are in possession of a goat, and the council has taken it? Why is your farm animal relevant to this conspiracy? Is this goat a resonant creature?" "No," Ethan stammered, the absurdity of the mistake hitting him. "It's an idiom, a figure of speech. It just means—" "Never mind. I just meant I'm angry." Lyra stared at him for one more second, and then, completely unexpectedly, she burst out laughing. It wasn't the polite, delicate laugh from the gala. This was a deep, belly-shaking laugh of pure release. "You humans," she gasped, wiping away a tear. "You speak in riddles. Gets my goat. I honestly thought I'd missed a critical intelligence briefing on Earth's fauna." Ethan started to chuckle too, the ridiculousness of the moment cutting right through the dread. "I guess it does sound a little silly when you put it like that." Lyra laughed even harder, leaning on him for support and clutching his arm. The room responded instantly. The heavy, anxious purple light shattered into a million tiny golden sparks that danced around them like happy fireflies. The air filled with the gentle sound of chiming bells. For just a moment, they were just two people laughing together in the dark, the conspiracy completely forgotten. Then the room froze. The golden fireflies stopped mid-dance. They all turned a sterile, clinical white. A low hum vibrated up through the floor, totally different from the room's normal ambiance. It was a mechanical, searching frequency. Lyra shot upright, her laughter gone in an instant. "Hush," she hissed. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. "The room is listening," she said, her eyes darting toward the ceiling. "Not to us, it's responding to an external command. Someone's pinging the network, looking for active chambers." Her face paled. "Counselor Malachor," she confirmed. "He knows I'm gone. He knows you're missing. He's sweeping the whole grid." She grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him toward the center of the vast, dark space. "We don't have much time. I need to show you the core. The real reason Malachor is desperate enough to risk a war." She waved her hand in a complicated gesture. The floor in front of them dissolved, revealing a pillar of pure light that rose from an impossible depth. Floating inside it, suspended in an anti-gravity field, was a swirling vortex of liquid crystal. "This," Lyra said, "is the resonance ledger." "It looks like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle," Ethan said. "It's memory," Lyra corrected him. "Actual memory, not the sanitized files the council releases to the public. Every time a mind is wiped, every time a treaty is forced, the emotional residue gets stored here. It's a fundamental law of our physics. Energy can't be destroyed, only stored. This is the council's dirty laundry basket." She pointed a trembling finger at the swirling vortex. "Malachor plans to provoke a war with Earth. He's the one who sabotaged your shuttle. He's going to sabotage the peace talks tomorrow. He needs a war to justify using the harmonizing wave, a planetary mind control protocol he claims will protect us from human aggression. But what it will really do is enslave both our species. He'll use the chaos of war to frighten your people into accepting neural dampers that he alone controls." "We have to inform the coalition," Ethan said, the diplomat in him kicking into high gear. "We need to get this proof to my superiors." "It's not that simple," Lyra argued. "Digital files can be altered, video can be deepfaked, but this—" She reached into the pillar of light, her hand vanishing into the vortex. She winced, as if the memories themselves were burning her skin. "This is a resonance ledger," she repeated. "It stores truth as patterns of shared emotion. It's impossible to fake because you can't forge the specific biosignature of a shared moment in time. You can't fake the feeling of a man dying or a woman being betrayed. It is the only evidence a Veyron jury will ever believe, because it can be felt." She pulled her hand back out. Resting in her palm was a small, glowing sphere of the liquid crystal. It pulsed with a heavy, sorrowful rhythm. "I can't carry this by myself, Ethan," she said, her gaze meeting his. "It requires 2 energy currents to keep it stable outside the chamber. One to act as a ground, and one to carry the signal. If I try to take it out of here alone, it will simply dissolve into nothing." Ethan looked at the sphere. It seemed impossibly heavy, burdened by the weight of 1,000 unspoken crimes. "What do I have to do?" he asked. "You have to carry it," Lyra said. "Not in your pocket. In your mind." She stepped closer, the sphere of light glowing between them. "But you have to understand, once you take this, you become a witness. The Council won't just deport you, they will hunt you to the ends of the universe. You will lose your career. You will lose your safety. You might even lose your mind." Just then, alarms began to blare in the distance, muffled by the room's shielding, but getting louder by the second. The stark white lights of the room began to flash an urgent, angry red. They'd been found. Ethan looked from the glowing sphere to Lyra's determined face. He thought about his career, his safe, predictable path to a boring ambassadorship. He thought about the pilot screaming in the recording, and he thought about the goat, and he realized, with crystal clarity, that he'd never really been a diplomat. He'd just been a bureaucrat. A diplomat builds peace. A bureaucrat just manages the paperwork. "If I have to choose between my career and my conscience," Ethan said, his voice perfectly steady, "I'll choose the one that lets me sleep at night." Lyra looked at him, and for the very first time her smile wasn't sharp or guarded. It was soft and beautiful and incredibly sad. "Then brace yourself," she said. She pressed the sphere right into his chest. It didn't hurt. It felt like being struck by lightning in slow motion. A tidal wave of images and feelings crashed into Ethan's mind. Faces he'd never seen, screams he'd never screamed, lies he'd never told. The full weight of the conspiracy settled deep inside his skull, a heavy, humming archive of undeniable truth. He staggered back, gasping for air. Lyra was there to catch him, her arms surprisingly strong around his waist. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you." The room suddenly lurched, as if it had been punched. The invisible walls seemed to buckle inward. "They're breaching the firewalls!" Lyra yelled over the rising scream of the alarms. "We have to go!" The doorway they'd used to enter began to glow white-hot as a cutting laser burned through from the other side. "Not that way!" Ethan shouted over the noise. "Trust the room!" Lyra cried out. She spun to face the back of the void, where there was nothing but empty darkness. She shouted a command in High Veyron, a word that cracked like a whip of thunder. "Room, path of the exiled, open!" And the thinking architecture of the room obeyed. He was framed for a crime he didn't commit, and now the people he trusted are trying to end him. This is the story of how a diplomat with nothing left to lose teamed up with a mysterious alien to expose a conspiracy that went all the way to the top. Stick around, because you are not going to believe how he gets out of this one. It all started when the room itself decided to save him. The floor didn't just open a door, it completely rewrote reality. It rippled under their feet, stretching out into the darkness to form a bridge. The walls melted away into a dizzying tunnel of chaotic, swirling light, a secret artery inside the living building. "The room is alive," Ethan gasped. It wasn't just a place, it was an ally. "Run!" Lyra shouted, grabbing his hand. They bolted onto the glowing bridge just as the main door blew inward, blasting the spot where they'd been standing with a shower of molten metal. Ethan risked a look back and saw armored soldiers pouring through the smoke, but it was too late for them. The bridge was already folding up behind them like a dying flower, sealing them off. He squeezed Lyra's hand, feeling the frantic pulse of her fear matching the heavy, humming truth that was buried deep in his own mind. They were running headfirst into the dark, into the very guts of this alien city. and for the first time in his entire life, Ethan Vale felt 100% terrifyingly awake. This maintenance tunnel of the Veyron Palace didn't smell like any hallway he'd ever been in. It smelled like the inside of a warm, mechanical lung. The walls weren't solid. They were lined with bundles of glowing, translucent cables that pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, pumping nutrients through the city's massive structure. To Ethan, it felt less like escaping a building and more like being swallowed whole by some giant space whale. "Keep moving, diplomat," Lyra's voice echoed in the tight, tubular space. "Unless you want to try explaining to those guards why you're carrying around enough treasonous data in your head to start a war." Ethan tripped over a bundle of what looked like optical nerves snaking across the floor. He was completely out of breath. His fancy uniform was torn at the shoulder, and the secret ledger of information he'd downloaded was still humming at the base of his skull like a guilty conscience. "I'm moving," Ethan wheezed, "but your architecture keeps trying to digest me." They finally reached a vertical shaft that dropped into an endless, dark abyss below and shot up into a blinding violet light above. There were no stairs, no ladders, just a column of shimmering, distorted air. "Gravity lift," Lyra said, walking right to the edge. "It reads your body mass and your intention. Just think down and lean forward." And with that, she stepped right off the ledge. But instead of plummeting, she drifted down as smoothly as a feather, her dress rippling around her like she was underwater. She looked back up at him, her face glowing in the shaft's strange, pulsing light. "Come on, Ethan. Down!" Ethan stared at the drop. It had to be at least 2,000 feet. Every survival instinct in his human brain, the part that evolved to be scared of cliffs, was screaming at him to stay put. He squeezed his eyes shut, thought the word down as hard as he could, and stepped into nothing. The lift didn't read his intent, it read his sheer panic. Instead of a graceful descent, Ethan dropped like a rock for a solid 20 feet, then was violently jerked upward as the gravity field totally overcorrected. He started flailing, spinning completely upside down, his boots kicking at nothing but air. "Stop fighting it!" Lyra yelled up at him, and he could actually hear the laughter in her voice. "You're confusing the gravitons!" "I'm falling down an elevator shaft," Ethan yelled back, tumbling in a slow, sickening circle. "Calm is not exactly an option right now." Lyra sighed, a sound that carried perfectly up the shaft. She kicked off the wall, launching herself upward to catch him. She grabbed the back of his belt and pulled him in close. Her own personal gravity field immediately stabilized his, and just like that, he was upright again, floating just inches from her face. "You are heavy," she said, shaking her head. "And you project the image of a flailing bird so loudly you're giving the lift a headache." "I prefer to call it a tactical descent," Ethan muttered, grabbing her arm to steady himself. "Just hold on to me," she said, rolling her eyes. "Looks like I'll be doing the thinking for both of us." Again, she started pulling him downward, towing him like a stubborn suitcase she was regretting having packed. They shot past a blur of different levels: hydroponic farms, giant water filtration systems, drone repair stations, until the air started to feel thick and damp. They finally stepped out of the shaft into a massive, dusty cavern that smelled of old stone and total silence. "Where are we?" Ethan whispered, his voice getting swallowed by the gloom. "The Museum of Forgotten Chords," Lyra said, brushing some dust off her sleeve. "The council shut it down 50 years ago. They claimed the history in here was unpleasant." The enormous room was filled with statues carved out of a dark, porous-looking rock. They were figures of the Veyron people, but they were all twisted in poses of either agony or pure ecstasy, their mouths open in silent screams and songs. As they walked by, Ethan felt that creepy prickle on the back of his neck. He spun around, absolutely certain the statue behind him had just turned its head. It was perfectly still, but its eyes, just hollowed-out pits, seemed to be following him. "Don't look at them for too long," Lyra warned him quietly. "They were carved by resonance priests. They hold on to a little echo of the artist's focus. If you stare at them, they stare right back." She led him over to a small maintenance closet hidden behind a tapestry made of woven metal wires. It was a tiny safe house, stocked with some basic food packs, a first aid kit, and a device that could jam local frequencies. Ethan collapsed onto a crate, his maze shaking. The adrenaline from the chase was wearing off, leaving a cold, heavy dread behind. He tapped the comm implant behind his ear. "I have to contact the delegation," he said. "If I can just get a signal out, I can warn the ambassador. I can tell him about the sabotage." "Ethan, don't," Lyra started to say, but he was already broadcasting. "This is Envoy Vale to Earth Delegation Command," he said, his words spilling out in a rush. "Priority Alpha. I have evidence of a hostile conspiracy by Chancellor Male Corps. I'm requesting immediate extraction and a secure line." The silence stretched for 10 long seconds. Then a voice crackled in his ear. It was Ambassador Halloway. "Ethan, thank God. We heard there was an explosion. Where are you?" "I'm safe," Ethan said, a massive wave of relief washing over him. "Sir, the Council. They orchestrated the shuttle attack. I have proof." "Stay right where you are," Halloway's voice said. But it sounded strange, too smooth. The rhythm of his speech was just a little bit off. "You're confused, son. You're suffering from shock. The Varans are our friends. Just surrender yourself to the nearest peacekeeper unit. It's for your own good." Ethan froze. That wasn't right. "Sir, the protocol code for a priority Alpha is Bluebird." "What is the countersign?" There was a short pause, a tiny glitch in the audio. Then the voice came back, dropping the warm, grandfatherly tone completely. "Surrender, Envoy, or be erased." The line went dead. Ethan just stared at the wall, his hand slowly falling from his ear. "They intercepted it," he whispered. "That wasn't him. They faked his voice." "I told you," Lyra said gently, handing him a water packet. "The Council controls the entire network. They control the airwaves, and they've been collecting human voice samples for decades." Ethan looked up at her, the crushing reality of his situation finally sinking in. "I'm on my own. My own government thinks I'm a traitor." "You're not on your own," Lyra said, sitting down so their shoulders brushed. "But you need to understand something, Ethan. I can't trust my allies either. The Council plants friendly faces everywhere. They even create fake rebel groups just to catch the real rebels. If we're going to survive this, we have to assume everyone is a trap until they prove they're not." She stood up and offered him a hand. "We can't stay here. That signal trace will lead them right to us in less than 10 minutes. We have to go to the Undercity." The Undercity was a full-blown assault on the senses. If the palace above was a silent cathedral of light, the Undercity was a loud, neon maze of desperate, chaotic life. It was built into the roots of the city, below the waterline, protected from the crushing ocean by massive transparent dams. The streets were narrow and packed with a dozen different alien species, all lit by the flicker of holographic ads and the glow of street food stalls selling sizzling skewers of some kind of cephalopod. The air was thick with the smell of frying spices, machine exhaust, and the weird metallic tang of illegal body modifications. Ethan pulled his hood down low, trying to make himself invisible inside his ruined uniform. He felt like he had a giant spotlight on him, a human diplomat in a place where humans were either clueless tourists or easy targets. Lyra, on the other hand, completely transformed. She ripped the hem of her elegant dress to make it look ragged, messed up her perfect hair, and adopted a confident swagger that was nothing like the graceful aristocrat from the party. "Walk like you own the pavement," she hissed at him. "If you look like a victim, you'll become one." She hooked her arm through his, pulling him close. Then she laughed, loud and fake, pointing at a stall selling black market memory chips. "Look at that, darling!" she shouted, her voice easily cutting through the noise of the crowd. "Total trash! I told you we should have gone to the spiral sector." Ethan blinked, shocked by how loud she was. Lyra pinched his arm, hard. "Laugh," she muttered through a bright, fake smile. You're my drunk, rich boyfriend. You're stupid and head over heels for me. Make them underestimate you." Ethan forced out a laugh, a loud, braying sound that felt absolutely ridiculous. "You're impossible," he yelled back, getting into it. "I offer to buy you the moon, and you demand the stars." Lyra giggled, leaning her head on his shoulder. It was a perfect act. To any of the shady mercenaries or smugglers watching from the alleys, they just looked like another pair of rich idiots slumming it for a thrill. But as she buried her face in his neck, pretending to whisper a secret between lovers, Ethan could feel her shaking. "Stay with me," she breathed, her voice a ghost of a sound. "Please, the Council's got eyes in the sky. If we split up, I can't shield your thoughts." Ethan tightened his arm around her waist, pulling her closer. It was all for show, but it was also his promise. "I'm right here," he thought back at her. They worked their way through the market's labyrinth, heading for the docks. They passed a stall where a back-alley Von doctor was literally tuning a patient's feelings with a grimy sonic fork. Ethan had to look away, a wave of nausea hitting him. "We need a ship," Lyra said, her public persona melting away as they slipped into a steamy alley. "Not some commercial liner. Something that's not on any official records." They found what they were looking for at the end of a pier that was slowly rotting into the sea. It wasn't what you'd call a ship. It looked more like a giant chunk of coral ripped from an ocean reef, with engines crudely attached. Its hull was a porous, living pink that seemed to breathe, dotted with barnacles that pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic glow. A creature that looked like a man-sized lobster in a leather bomber jacket stood by the ramp. He was puffing on a pipe that blew iridescent bubbles instead of smoke. "Captain Vrax?" Lyra ventured. The captain swiveled. His eyes, perched on stalks, moved on their own. One zeroed in on Lyra, while the other gave Ethan a thorough once-over. "Not taking passengers," Vrax rasped, his voice like rocks tumbling in a blender. "Especially not council nobility and her pet human." "We're not passengers," Lyra shot back, holding up a small, shimmering pouch. "We're cargo, and we're paying with refined resonance crystals." Both of Vrax's eyes snapped to the pouch. He took a deep sniff of the air. "High grade," he grunted. "Stolen," Lyra corrected. "Liberated." Vrax let out a clicking chuckle. "I like that word. Fewer legal headaches. Get aboard. But if you get blood on my seats, I'm kicking you out into the ionosphere." The ship's interior, nicknamed the Salty Lung, was just as organic as its outside. The hallways were lined with a soft, spongy tissue that muffled every sound, and the air was thick, warm, and humid. Vrax showed them to a small cabin not far from the engine room. "It's no five-star hotel," he said. "But the ship seems to like you. The walls are turning a nice shade of pink. That's a good sign. They usually go a sickly gray when I have politicians on board." With that, he left. Ethan just collapsed onto the bunk, the adrenaline finally giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. Lyra slid to the floor, resting her back against the ship's gently vibrating wall. "So," Ethan said, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, which looked like it was made of cartilage. "We're making a getaway on a giant space shrimp." "She's a symbiotic cruiser," Lyra corrected, her eyes closed. "Grown from stardust. She feeds on solar winds and responds to her pilot's thoughts. She's the fastest ship in this sector because she genuinely wants to fly." She opened her eyes, all the earlier playfulness gone. "Ethan," she said seriously, "back there, when you took the imprint, you didn't even flinch." "No," Ethan confirmed. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "You hardly know me. I abducted you. I've lied to you. I'm technically a war criminal in 3 different systems." Ethan pushed himself up. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the streak of grime on her cheek, the weariness in her shoulders, and the sharp, burning intelligence in her eyes. "Because you stopped lying," he said simply. "In that room. That was the first time since I got to this planet that anyone told me the truth. My own government was feeding me lines. But you showed me how awful it all was." He paused, searching for the right words. "And the resonance. When we connected, it wasn't just a rush. It wasn't just some high. For the first time, I felt seen. For 10 years, I've just been a puppet for the Coalition. I say what they program me to say. I feel what they tell me to feel. But sitting in that chair, connected to you, I felt like I was finally living my own life." Lyra stared down at her hands, her natural glow fading to a soft, sad blue. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of the council?" "No," she said, looking up, her eyes glistening. "Of you. I'm afraid that when you see all of me, not just the rebel fighter, but the person who turned the key, the things I've done, the minds I've shattered, you'll decide I'm too far gone to love. You'll see all the broken pieces and decide I can't be fixed." Ethan slid off the bunk and knelt on the floor in front of her. He reached out and took her hand. This time he didn't wait for permission. He just held it. "I'm not looking for a perfect statue, Lyra," he said softly. "I saw plenty of those back in the museum. They were beautiful, but they were cold. I'm looking for the person who decided to stop breaking things and start putting them back together." Lyra let out a shaky breath that was almost a sob and squeezed his hand. "You're a terrible diplomat," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "You're way too honest." Before Ethan could answer, the entire ship gave a violent shudder. The gentle pink glow of the walls flashed to a blinding strobe-like white. A siren wailed, not a mechanical alarm, but a raw, biological shriek of pain from the ship itself. Vrax's voice boomed over the intercom. "We've got company! Council enforcers! They've snagged us with a grapple beam!" Ethan and Lyra jumped to their feet. "Resonance dampeners!" Lyra yelled, clutching her head. "I can feel them! They're flooding the ship with static. My powers are useless!" Ethan tried the door. It was locked tight, but he could hear the heavy thud of mag boots marching down the corridor. "They want you alive," Ethan said, his mind racing. "Which means they probably want me dead." Lyra's eyes darted around the cabin. "The ship's alive," she said, thinking out loud. "Vrax said it responds to intent, but the dampeners are blinding it. We have to give it directions. Physically." She scrambled to a pulsating panel on the wall, which was a nerve cluster for the ship's internal systems. She tore the cover off, revealing a tangle of wet, glowing fibers. "What are you doing?" Ethan yelled over the noise. "Giving the ship a bad case of indigestion," Lyra shouted back. She plunged her hands into the fibers and gave them a hard, violent twist. Outside, the ship let out a deep groan. The floor buckled under their feet. Suddenly, the corridor right outside their door began to convulse. A huge, muscular wave rippled through the ship's structure. Ethan heard the enforcers shout in shock, followed by the sickening, wet crunch of armored bodies being smashed between the floor and the ceiling. "Gross," Ethan said, strangely impressed. "But effective," Lyra grunted, pulling her hands free. "Now the comms! If they're coordinating, they'll be on a local battle network." Ethan lunged for the wall terminal. He didn't know the Veyron coding language, but he understood the logic of how language worked. He pulled up the communications array, which was being drowned in the council's jamming signal. "I can't break through the jam," he muttered, his fingers flying across the keypad. "But I can contaminate the signal." He started feeding the council's translation software a loop of self-contradicting commands, a linguistic virus he'd once designed as a theoretical negotiation tactic. He broadcast it across all frequencies. Inside the helmets of the council agents, their orders instantly turned to nonsense. Advance became retreat. Capture became eject. Target became self. Chaos erupted in the hallway. "We've lost tactical cohesion!" a guard's voice shrieked over the ship's intercom. "The commands are complete gibberish!" "Vrax, now!" Ethan yelled at the ceiling. "Hang on to your lunches!" Vrax roared back. The ship twisted like a living thing, its entire hull contracting. With a gut-wrenching lurch, it snapped the grapple lock, tearing away a huge piece of its own coral armor in the process. The engine screamed to life, and they shot into hyperspace, leaving the bewildered council agents tumbling in the blackness of space. They dropped out of warp about 3 hours later, emerging in the shadow of a shattered moon. It was a place of broken, breathtaking beauty. The moon had been destroyed ages ago, but its gravitational core was still active. Huge islands of rock, some as big as cities, floated in a sparkling ring around the moon's core. Waterfalls cascaded from one island to the next right through the vacuum of space, freezing into crystalline mist before turning back to liquid as they hit the thin atmosphere of the fragment below. "Welcome to the sanctuary of the broken note," Lyra said softly as Vrax guided the ship toward a landing pad on a lush, jungle-covered island. "Why this place?" Ethan asked, mesmerized by the floating continents. "Because this is where it all began," she replied. They landed next to a ruined temple, its stones choked with vibrant purple vines. "You kids go have your moment," the captain grumbled as he started on repairs. "I've got a bulkhead to regrow." Lyra led Ethan into the silent ruins. It was a library filled with rows of crystalline tablets covered in dust. "This was the first resonance chamber," Lyra explained, her voice echoing in the ancient hall. "Before the council, before all the politics. The priests who lived here didn't use resonance to control people. They used it to heal." She paused in front of a faded mural on the wall. It depicted Vayrons and other alien species sitting together in a circle, with streams of light flowing between them. "The chamber was meant to be a place where you could bring your trauma, your grief, your fear, and share the burden of it with someone else," she said. "So you wouldn't have to carry it all by yourself. That's what pleasure was supposed to be, Ethan. Not just a feeling, but a release. The relief of being truly seen and not being judged for it." Ethan stared at the mural. He thought of the pilots, the diplomats, and the millions of people the council was planning to harmonize into unthinking drones. "They took a medicine and turned it into a poison," he said, his voice thick with anger. "Yes," Lyra whispered, "and I helped them, because it was easier to be the one turning the key than the one in the cage. It was easier to create silence than to scream." She turned to face him. "That's the lesson I learned way too late. Using pleasure to run from your pain is easy. That's just addiction. But seeking connection to face your pain, to let someone see your deepest wounds and still be willing to touch you? That takes real courage." Ethan stepped toward her and gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "We have to be brave then," he said. Lyra nodded, pulling a small, clear crystal from her pocket. "We need insurance," she stated plainly. "Male Core is going to try and edit our memories. He'll want to make us forget everything we know, even each other. This will be our anchor." She held the crystal between them. "A resonance imprint," she explained. "We pour the truth of this moment into it. Everything we're feeling right now, the fear, the hope, the love, we weave it all into a pattern so complex it can't be faked. If they wipe our minds, this crystal can restore the original file. It can remind us who we really are." "How do we do it?" Ethan asked. "We just feel," Lyra said. "Together." She gently pressed the crystal to his forehead, then leaned in until her own forehead touched his, with the cool stone nestled between them. "Close your eyes," she whispered. Ethan did. He didn't think about tactical reports or try to rehearse a speech. He just let himself feel. He felt the gritty stone floor through the soles of his boots. He felt the thick, humid air of the jungle on his skin. He smelled Lyra's hair, a scent of ozone and fresh rain. Deeper still, he felt the fierce, protective fire burning in his own heart. He felt the raw terror of being hunted, the searing anger at the injustice of it all, and the profound, stabilizing gravity of the woman standing right in front of him. He felt her fear, vibrating against his mind like a freshly plucked string. He felt her guilt, a heavy, cold weight, and he wrapped his own warmth around it, not to take it away, but just to be there with it. "I see it," he sent to her mind. "And I'm still here." The crystal between them grew warm. It began to hum, a low sound that climbed in pitch until it became a pure, unwavering note. Lyra gasped, her mental defenses dropping completely for one timeless second. In that instant, there was no Ethan, no Lyra. There was only a shared consciousness, a single point of light in the vast darkness of the universe that knew with absolute certainty that it was not alone. Then, just as quickly, the crystal cooled. They pulled apart, breathless and reeling from the intensity. The crystal in Lyra's hand was no longer clear. A nebula of gold and deep violet swirled within it. "It's done," she whispered, clutching it tightly. "This is our proof and our promise." Ethan looked from the crystal to her face. "Now all we have to do is survive long enough to use it," he said. Lyra offered a small smile as she slipped the crystal into a hidden pocket over her heart. "Then let's go start a war," she replied. They turned and walked back toward the ship, the floating islands of the moon watching them like silent giants as the first stars of evening began to pierce the mist. The asteroid station, known as the Ocular, drifted in the neutral zone between the Veyron sectors and the territories of the human coalition. It was a hollowed-out rock the size of a small moon, spinning just enough to create gravity, its surface bristling with docking clamps and sensor arrays. Inside, it was an opulent cage of gold-veined marble and recycled air, meticulously designed to make powerful people feel comfortable while they decided the fate of the galaxy. Ethan Vale tugged at the cuffs of the stolen diplomatic dress uniform he was wearing. It was a little too tight across the shoulders, a constant, nagging reminder that he was in a dead man's clothes. He stood at the entrance to the Grand Rotunda, the station's massive central hall where the multi-species summit was already in full swing. "Stop fidgeting," Lyra's voice whispered in his ear. "You look like you're trying to sneak a badger through customs." Ethan glanced to his left. Lyra Saurin was there, but she was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. She was dressed in the drab, gray robes of a ceremonial attendant, one of the silent servants who refilled drinks and held data pads for the elite. She kept her head bowed, her natural bioluminescence turned down to a dull, subservient gray. The transformation was jarring. The vibrant, dangerous woman who had pulled him through maintenance shafts was gone, replaced by someone who looked like part of the furniture. "I'm not fidgeting," Ethan muttered, his lips barely moving. "I'm making a tactical adjustment to my discomfort. And I still don't like you being unarmed." "I'm not unarmed," Lyra murmured, stepping forward to brush an imaginary speck of dust from his lapel in a perfect imitation of a dutiful attendant. "I have you, and you have the ledger. Now chin up. Remember who you are. Envoy Ethan Vale, the arrogant human who somehow survived a shuttle explosion and is now too stupid to be scared." "That's not a very flattering cover story," Ethan said. "It's the only one they'll believe," Lyra replied. "Now go. I'll circle the perimeter and find the broadcast node. Don't look at me again. To everyone here, I don't exist." She vanished back into the crowd, moving with the terrifying anonymity of the serving class. A sharp pang of loneliness hit Ethan. For the last 48 hours, she had been his anchor. Without her beside him, the room suddenly felt immense, the lights blindingly bright. He took a deep breath and stepped into the rotunda. The room was an assault on the senses. Delegates from a dozen worlds mingled beneath a domed ceiling projecting a real-time view of the starfield outside. He saw the crustacean-like ambassadors from the Riel sector clicking their claws as they negotiated. He saw the gaseous beings of the Nebular Accord, contained in floating glass jars, and the Veyron delegation, moving through the crowd like sharks in silk robes. Ethan spotted Chancellor Maelkor right away. The Veyron leader was holding court near a fountain of liquid light, smiling with the easy confidence of a predator who has already eaten. Ethan grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and plastered a wide, fake smile on his face as he waded into the crowd. "Envoy Vale!" a voice boomed. Ethan turned to see Director Vance, a high-ranking human official he recognized from encrypted briefings. Vance was a big man with a face like a block of granite and eyes that were constantly scanning for exits. "Director," Ethan said, giving a slight bow. "I wasn't sure you'd recognize me. The reports of my death were a bit exaggerated." Vance gripped Ethan's shoulder with a hand that felt like a hydraulic clamp. He guided Ethan away from the main flow of traffic and into a quiet alcove near a display of antique star charts. "You look like hell, son," Vance said, his jovial tone gone. "We thought the Vayrans had vaporized you. We were in the middle of drafting a very strongly worded letter of condemnation." "They tried," Ethan said, keeping his voice low. "Director, we have a serious problem. The Council isn't here for a trade treaty. Male Corps is planning to—" "I know," Vance cut him off. Ethan froze. "You know?" Vance took a sip of his drink, his gaze sweeping across the party. "We know about their resonance technology. We know it can influence behavior. That's why we're here, Ethan." A cold pit opened in Ethan's stomach. "Sir, it does more than influence behavior. It enslaves. I've seen it. They harvest fear. They rewrite memories." Vance finally looked at Ethan, and for the first time, Ethan saw the cold calculation behind the man's eyes. It wasn't the look of a victim. It was the look of a customer. "Ethan," Vance said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "the galaxy is a dangerous place. The Coalition needs every advantage it can get. If the Vayrons have a weapon that can ensure loyalty, that can pacify a population without firing a single shot, well, humanity can't afford to be the only ones without it." Ethan stared at him, dumbfounded. "You want to buy it? You want to use their mind control tech?" "We're calling them stabilization protocols," Vance corrected him. "And yes, the treaty Male Corps is offering includes a technology transfer in exchange for a few concessions. We get the blueprints for the resonance chambers." Ethan stumbled back a step. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. He thought he was here to save humanity from an alien threat. He never imagined that humanity was waiting in line to buy the chains. "You're going to let them edit us," Ethan whispered in disbelief. "Compromise is the language of survival," Vance said, his eyes hardening. "Now get back out there, smile, shake a few hands, and for God's sake don't do anything heroic. Heroes tend to have very short careers." Vance patted him on the shoulder again and walked away. Swallowed by the swirling crowd, Ethan stood alone in the alcove, his hand shaking so badly that the water in his glass rippled. He felt sick. The betrayal was absolute. The cavalry wasn't coming. The cavalry was already here, and they were busy negotiating the price of the saddle. A soft touch on his elbow made him jump. "More champagne, sir?" a quiet voice asked. It was Lyra. She was holding a silver tray, her eyes fixed on the floor. "They know," Ethan whispered, pretending to examine his glass. "My own people. They know about the tech. They want to buy it." Lyra didn't even flinch. "Of course they do," she murmured. "Power doesn't care about species, Ethan. It only cares about its own appetite." "We have to stop this," Ethan said. "Not just the Vayrans. All of it." "Then we need to get moving," Lyra said. "I tracked the signal cables. The broadcast node isn't in the tower. It's below us, in the cargo processing levels." She turned and walked away, weaving effortlessly through the crowd. Ethan downed his drink in one gulp, set the empty glass on a pedestal, and followed her, trying to look for all the world like a bored diplomat searching for the restroom. They slipped through a service door in the kitchens and began their descent into the guts of the station. The lower levels of the ocular were a stark, brutalist contrast to the gold and marble far above. Imagine discovering that the most powerful man in the galaxy wasn't building weapons, but something far worse, a way to package and sell tyranny to the highest bidder. That's the nightmare my friend Lyra and I stumbled into, and we had less than an hour to stop it. If you've ever felt like the little guy fighting a rigged system, you're going to want to hear this. We found ourselves deep in the station's sterile underbelly, where everything was cold steel and the low thrum of industry. We finally reached a massive blast door. "This has to be it," Lyra whispered, her scanner glowing. "The power readings are off the charts." She worked her magic, and the door hissed open. I stepped through and froze. It wasn't a medical bay. It was a cavernous hangar filled with hundreds of metallic pods stacked like coffins. They were sleek, silver, and pulsed with a faint, sickening energy. "Portable resonance chambers," Lyra breathed, her voice shaking with horror. I walked between the rows of pods, a cold dread washing over me. They were human-sized, engineered for mass production. This was the export model. The chilling realization hit me. They weren't just for this station. They were going to ship these to every corner of the galaxy. Lyra was already at a central console, her face illuminated by the screen's cold blue light as she pulled up the shipping manifests. The targets weren't soldiers or criminals. They were dissidents, labor leaders, journalists, political opponents. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror. "This is Mailcorp's master plan. He's not going to conquer the galaxy with an army. He's going to sell every government the tools to silence its own people. It's a franchise of oppression. We have to destroy this place," I said, my hands balling into fists. "No," Lyra shot back, her mind already racing. "If we burn it down, they'll just build another one. We have to expose it. We have to show the summit what these things really are." She pointed to the console. "The station's central broadcast is scheduled for the signing ceremony in 1 hour. If I can hack into the feed, we can play the resonance ledger. We can make every single person in that room feel the truth." She began typing frantically, her fingers a blur as she tore through layers of security. I stood guard, the oppressive silence of the hangar pressing in, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 minds they planned to erase. Suddenly, Lyra's hands froze above the keys. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp. "What is it?" I asked, rushing to her side. She wasn't looking at lines of code anymore. She was staring at a single file. "It's an execution order," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned closer to the console. The screen displayed an official Veyron legal document authorizing the immediate termination of 1 Lyra Saurin for treason. "That's not exactly a shock," I said gently. "You are a rebel, after all." "Look at the date," she said, her finger trembling as she pointed to the timestamp. I looked. It was dated 3 days ago. That was before we escaped the palace, before any of this started. "They knew," Lyra choked out, her voice cracking. "They knew I was going to turn. They let me escape," she said, stumbling back from the console. "They let me find you." "Why?" I asked, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "Because they needed a live demonstration," Lyra said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "They needed a dangerous Veyron radical to corrupt a human diplomat. They're going to use us as their sales pitch for why the galaxy needs these chambers. We're the monsters in their story, Ethan. I'm the seductive traitor, and you're my poor victim." She shook her head, her whole body trembling. "I led you right into their trap. I did exactly what they wanted." "Lyra, stop," I said, reaching for her. "Don't touch me." She flinched away, bumping into one of the cold silver pods. "I'm a weapon, Ethan. Everything I touch, I break," she sobbed, sliding down the side of the pod and burying her face in her hands. I tried to be a hero, but I'm just their pawn on a longer string. I stood there for a second, the hum of those terrible machines filling the silence. Then I knelt down in front of her. "Why did you invite me to your room that night?" I asked softly. Lyra looked up, her eyes wild and red-rimmed. "What?" "Back at the palace," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You could have picked a general, a master spy, anyone. Why did you choose the clumsy linguistics consultant who nearly tripped into the punch bowl?" Lyra just stared at me, her breathing hitched. "Because you looked lonely," she whispered, the confession tumbling out. "And because I knew I was probably going to die. I knew this was a one-way mission, that they would burn me for it. And I didn't want to die without having one real thing, just one. Her voice was raw with shame. I've spent my whole life inside people's heads, faking their emotions, manufacturing affection. I just wanted someone to see the real me, just for a moment, and not run away. I used you, Ethan. I needed a witness because I was too terrified to face the end by myself. This time, when I reached for her, she didn't pull away. I took her hands in mine. They were ice cold. You didn't use me, I said firmly. You woke me up! I leaned in closer, our faces just inches apart. The air between us crackled, but it wasn't the fake, forced connection from the gala. This was real, like two people standing on a cliff, deciding to jump together. I'm not a victim, Lyra, I said. And right now, I'm not a diplomat. I'm just the guy who sees you. I lifted her hands and pressed them flat against my chest, right over my heart. Feel that? I asked. That's not fear. She closed her eyes, her fingers curling against the thin fabric of my uniform. Through it, she could feel the steady, stubborn beat of my heart. A long, shuddering sigh escaped her lips, and the tension seemed to drain from her body. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine. Teach me, she whispered. You taught me what it felt like to be more than just flesh and bone. Now teach me how to be human. Teach me how to stay when all I want to do is run. I moved my hand to the back of her neck, my thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. You stay, I said softly, because the only other choice is silence. And then I kissed her. It wasn't some fairy tale kiss. It was messy and desperate, tasting of salt and fear. But in that moment, something fundamental shifted. The connection between us flared, not like a blinding light, but like a deep, grounding warmth. Lyra gasped against my mouth, but she wasn't pushing thoughts into my head. She was pulling me in, letting me see everything. I felt her exhaustion, her terror, and beneath it all, a fierce, burning hope that looked just like me. And I finally understood. True connection wasn't about control or sensation. It was about empathy. It was about the terrifying, beautiful act of letting someone else into the space you keep guarded. It wasn't about taking. It was about being allowed to share. We pulled apart slowly, both of us breathless. The cold hangar didn't feel so menacing anymore. We're going to change their broadcast, I said, my voice filled with a new resolve. Lyra nodded, wiping the tears from her face. Her eyes were clear and focused now. Yes, we are. She stood and pulled me back to the console. Her fingers flew across the keys with renewed purpose. I'm splicing the resonance ledger directly into the main feed, she explained. When Core calls for the vote, instead of the grand anthem, the whole station is going to get a front row seat to the raw, emotional horror of his crimes. Every delegate is going to feel exactly what it's like to have your mind stolen. She hit a final key. It's uploaded, set on a 10-minute timer. Just then, the large screen above the console flickered on, showing a grainy image of a holding cell, and my heart stopped. Suspended in the center of the cell was Vrax, our crab-like pilot. He was missing an arm, his shell cracked and leaking blue fluid. A cold voice echoed through the hangar's speakers. It was male Core. Lyra Saurin, we know you're in there. Lyra gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles turning white. You have a choice, my dear. Core's voice purred with false sweetness. You can let your little signal run. If you do, the captain dies a very public death, and then we vent this entire level into the vacuum of space. Or, he continued, you can surrender. Bring the human to the rotunda, confess how you manipulated him, and the captain lives." The screen went dark, plunging the room back into gloom. "He came back for us," Lyra whispered, a sob catching in her throat. "Vrax came back." She turned towards the door, her mind made up. "I have to go." I stepped directly in her path. "No." "Ethan, he's dying for me," she cried, trying to push past. "I can't let that happen." "If you surrender, everyone dies," I shouted, grabbing her shoulders to make her listen. "Vrax, us, and the millions of people who will be silenced by these machines. Is that what he's dying for? So you can give up?" She trembled in my grasp, the fight draining out of her. "But I can't be the one to kill him, Ethan," she pleaded. "I'm not like male core." I looked straight into her soul. "We are not choosing to kill him. We are choosing to make his sacrifice mean something. They want us to trade one life for millions. That's their sick game, so we're not going to play. We're going to flip the whole board over." She stopped struggling and leaned against me, defeated. "What do we do?" "We go to the rotunda," I said, a desperate plan forming. "But we don't surrender. We trigger the signal from the center of the floor." "But the signal's range," she started. "Exactly," I finished. "We have to be the antenna." We took off, running for our lives, and for countless others. On stage, Chancellor Mael Kor's voice echoed through the massive dome, smooth as polished steel. "The time has come," he declared to the silent, captive audience, "to cast aside the chaotic emotions that breed war. The Treaty of Harmony isn't just a document, it's a promise of peace." Ethan looked over at Lyra. Her face was carved from ice. She slipped a hand into her pocket, her fingers closing around a crystal that pulsed with a wild, dangerous light. It was their last resort. "Ready?" Ethan whispered. Lyra grabbed his hand, her grip firm. "Always." Together, they stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtain. Ethan didn't move like the diplomat he was supposed to be. He moved like a soldier marching into battle. As they strode to the center of the stage, a wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Guards started to move in, but Chancellor Kor just raised a single hand, a cruel, knowing smile twisting his lips. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The prodigal children have returned to confess their sins." Ethan lifted the glowing crystal high for everyone to see. "We're not here to confess, Chancellor," he yelled, his voice straining but carrying to every corner of the room. "We're here to share." The Chancellor's smile vanished. "Stop them!" he roared, but it was already too late. Lyra placed her hand over Ethan's on the crystal. She squeezed her eyes shut and unleashed a silent scream, not from her lungs, but from the depths of her soul. She poured every ounce of herself into that stone. All her fear, all her love, and all of the ugly truth. Ethan became her anchor, taking that raw, psychic energy and broadcasting it out to the world. The crystal didn't shatter into pieces. It exploded into a tidal wave of pure, unfiltered feeling that slammed into the audience. In the front row, the Raelian ambassador screamed, clutching his head as he was forced to experience the psychic agony of having his own mind surgically rewritten. Director Vance collapsed to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably as the crushing grief of a mother whose child had been reassigned flooded his soul. The Veyron delegation staggered back, their perfect masks of composure cracking as the foul taste of their own corruption filled their mouths like ash. It was pure chaos. It was pandemonium. It was the truth, delivered like a punch to the gut. In an instant, the council's lies were laid bare, their beautiful harmony revealed as a cage. Their perfect peace was exposed for what it was, a lobotomy for the masses. Mael Kor shrieked in pure fury, pulling a weapon from inside his robes. It wasn't a blaster. It was a bizarre, tuning fork-shaped device. "Kill them!" he screamed, pointing it right at them. The device hummed and fired a concentrated pulse of sonic energy, a mind-wipe blast. Ethan saw it coming. He saw Lyra, completely drained, her defenses gone. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even think. He just moved, throwing himself in front of her. The pulse hit him square in the chest. It wasn't a burning pain. It felt like someone had reached directly into his brain and simply switched off the lights. The force threw him backward, sending him skidding across the polished marble floor. His vision exploded into white, then faded to a dull gray. He could hear screaming all around him, the sounds of the station's own security forces suddenly turning on the Chancellor's personal guards. He heard the sound of shattering glass. Then he felt hands on his face. Warm, frantic hands. "Ethan! Ethan, look at me!" He forced his eyes open and saw a face floating above him. A beautiful face, with silver hair and eyes the color of a thunderstorm. He knew, somewhere deep down, that he was supposed to know this face. He knew it was the most important face in the entire universe. But as he stared, the edges started to go fuzzy. The name that belonged to her slipped through his mind like sand through his fingers. "We have to go!" the woman yelled, pulling him to his feet. Ethan scrambled up, his head feeling strangely light and empty. "Who?" he tried to ask, but the word wouldn't come out. "Just run!" she cried, dragging him through the screaming, panicking crowd toward the docking bays. Ethan ran because she was pulling him. He ran because some deep, primal instinct remembered that he trusted this woman with his life. But as they sprinted down the long corridor, searching for a ship, a terrifying, hollow certainty settled in his gut. Ethan Vale couldn't remember why he loved her. He only knew that he did, and the silence inside his head was growing louder with every step. He woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the low hum of a ship's engine. He knew exactly where he was. A stolen medical skiff, hiding out on the edge of the Veyron system. He knew his name was Ethan Vale, a diplomat from Earth. He knew the woman in the pilot's chair was Lyra Saurin, a former council telepath, and now the most wanted fugitive in the sector. He knew these things like he knew the capital of his home planet or the chemical formula for water. They were just facts, data points filed away in his mind. But when he looked at her, at the gentle curve of her neck and the way her silver hair fell across her shoulders, he felt absolutely nothing. There was just a cold, terrifying emptiness in his chest where a universe of feeling used to be. He could remember that he loved her. He could access the memory of their last kiss, of their desperate plan, but he couldn't recall the why. The texture of the emotion itself had been scoured clean by that blast. Ethan pushed himself up, the movement making his head spin. Lyra turned around instantly, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. She looked at him with a desperate hope, searching for the man she knew was in there somewhere. "Ethan?" she whispered. "I am functional," Ethan stated. His voice was perfectly calm, too calm. "I have reviewed the mission parameters. We failed to stop the broadcast, but the resonance burst was successfully deployed. However, I appear to have sustained significant cognitive damage." Lyra flinched like he'd physically struck her. She took a step toward him, her hand reaching out before she pulled it back. Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You are Lyra Saurin," Ethan recited, like he was reading from a textbook. "You are my ally. We are involved." "Involved?" Lyra repeated the word, and it tasted like poison. She spun away, pacing the tiny cabin like a caged animal. "It's like they took the color out of a painting," Ethan said, struggling to find words for the horror unfolding inside his own mind. "I can still see the lines, Lyra. I know the shape of us. But the paint is gone. It's just a gray canvas." Lyra slammed her fist against the metal wall. "That's what they do!" she yelled, her voice thick with rage. "That's their masterpiece! They don't erase the memory, they erase the meaning. They leave you the facts so you don't go insane." But they strip away the passion, she continued, so you become obedient. She jabbed a finger at the wall screen, bringing it to life with a Veyron newsfeed. The footage showed Ethan at the summit, but it was twisted. His movements were jerky and erratic, his eyes wild. They had subtly altered the audio to make his voice sound shrill and unhinged. The human envoy, Ethan Vale, suffered a catastrophic psychic break during the summit, the news anchor said in a smooth, sympathetic tone. This tragedy highlights the inherent instability of the human mind. It is proof that without the harmonizing wave, our species simply cannot coexist safely. They're using you, Lyra spat. You're the poster child for their cure. They're telling the whole galaxy that humans are too emotionally fragile to be free. Ethan watched the distorted version of himself on the screen. He looked like a madman. He knew it was a lie, but he couldn't summon the anger he should have felt. There was only a Kantamankalnan conclusion. We need to fix this, Ethan said. Not just the politics. Me. I can't fight a war if I can't care about winning it. We're going back, Lyra said, her jaw set with determination. To the palace. That seems tactically unsound, Ethan noted calmly. It's the most heavily fortified location on the entire planet. It's also the only place with a pristine resonance core, Lyra shot back. The portable ones they use are cheap junk. They can't rebuild a mind like yours. But the original chamber, she continued, the secret one behind the throne room, it has the deep protocols. It remembers everything. If we can get you into that core, we might be able to use the psychic imprint we made on the moon to overwrite the damage. Ethan nodded slowly. It was a suicide mission, but living as an empty shell was its own kind of death. Very well, he said. Let's go commit a felony. The flight back to Vera was a nightmare. The planet was in an uproar. The council had locked down the capital city, blaming human terrorist cells for the chaos, and the planet's weather control grid was failing, wrapping the city in violent storms of purple lightning and driving rain. They ditched the medical skiff in the slums and made their way toward the palace on the Sky Bridge, a floating ribbon of translucent material connecting the commercial towers to the government's private island. The wind howled around them, tearing at their cloaks. Far below, the ocean churned, lit up by strobing flashes of lightning. Swarms of security drones buzzed overhead like angry hornets, their scanners sweeping the crowds. Keep your head down, Lyra shouted over the wind. The architecture is shifting. The council's put the city in defensive mode. Ethan looked ahead and saw she was right. The bridge was literally reconfiguring itself, its glowing panels rearranging to create new walls and checkpoints. The city's once beautiful, flowing lines were transforming into jagged, ugly fortifications. Massive, 3-story tall holographic screens lined the bridge, all of them playing a looped video of a fake Ethan. In the video, he sat in a chair, weeping, thanking Mael Kor for quieting the noise in his head. That's strange, Ethan yelled to Lyra, pointing at the screen. I don't remember crying. I usually just repress my emotions until I get a stomach ulcer. It's the human way. Lyra let out a sharp, surprised laugh, a rough and broken sound in the middle of the storm. You're remembering your cynicism, at least. They finally reached a checkpoint, where a towering robotic sentry blocked their path, its red scanner sweeping back and forth. Lyra quickly pulled Ethan behind a large, twisting sculpture that spun in the wind. We have to talk our way past, Lyra whispered urgently. I can block their comms for 3 seconds. Tops. That's all you get. You have to convince that guard using the formal dialect of the servant class. Act meek. Make yourself small. I've got this, Ethan replied, his internal language files confirming they were fully operational. Now, Lyra hissed, hitting the jammer. Ethan stepped into the light, bowing deeply before the Veyron guard, a towering figure in ornate armor standing beside a floating security drone. A good evening to you, exalted protector, Ethan said in perfect deferential Hivon. My partner and I are just taking out the trash from the gala. We're not worthy of your time. The guard eyed him with suspicion, while the jammer let out a low hum. The drone's red eye twitched. "Your partner," the guard grunted, his voice a low click. "She carries herself like a soldier." Ethan shot a nervous glance at Lyra. He could feel the tension coiling in her muscles, ready to snap. He had to kill the mood, fast. He needed to sound like a clumsy, love-struck fool. He searched his database for a pet name, a term of endearment. "Oh, her? She's a handful," Ethan said, forcing a wide, goofy grin. "But don't you worry, I know how to handle her. Come on, my—" He tried to say little flower. He found a word that was almost right. "Come on, my treasured war crime," Ethan beamed. The guard just stared. Lyra went rigid. And in that split second, Ethan knew he'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. The only difference between flower and genocide was a tiny shift in tone. The guard blinked slowly. Did you just call your lady a war crime?" "Well, she can be a real force of nature when she's hungry," Ethan stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. The guard made a strange noise, somewhere between a choke and a chuckle. "Get out of here, you idiot, before I book you for crimes against poetry." They scurried past the checkpoint, melting into the deep shadows along the palace wall. The second they were clear, Lyra yanked Ethan into a dark service alcove. He could feel her shaking. "My treasured war crime?" she whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. "I'm so sorry," Ethan said, feeling a wave of shame. "My language files must be corrupted. I meant to say flower." Lyra looked up at him, and for the first time all night, the raw despair in her eyes finally broke, and she started to laugh. She laughed so hard she couldn't breathe, tears of pure, hysterical relief mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "It's perfect," she gasped. "It's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, because it's true." She wiped her eyes, her expression turning serious again. "We're close. The resonance priests are in the lower sanctuary. If anyone can get us into that tribunal hall, it's them." The sanctuary was a quiet, cavern-like space dug out beneath the palace, lit by flickering candles. It smelled of ancient incense and deep sorrow. A dozen priests sat in a circle, their robes frayed and their eyes wrapped in cloth to sharpen their other senses. They didn't stir as Ethan and Lyra entered. "We sensed your approach," the eldest priest said, his voice as brittle as autumn leaves. "The broken key and the hollow man," the priest continued. "We need to get to the core," Lyra said, stepping into the circle. "Chancellor Core is about to activate the harmonizing wave. You know what that will do. It will turn every being on this planet into a single hive mind." "We know," the elder sighed. "We helped design the amplifiers. We were told we were building a choir to unite all voices. We never knew we were actually building a cage." "Then help us," Ethan pleaded. "Show us the maintenance path to the throne room." The elder tilted his head. "We can open the path, but the door to the core itself is sealed by the Chancellor's personal biorhythm. It will only open for a sacrifice." "A sacrifice?" Lyra repeated. "Testimony," the priest corrected. "The tribunal is already in session," the priest explained. "Core is presenting his wave to the council. To look like a hero, he needs a villain. If you, Lyra Sauron, walk in there and testify, if you admit to your so-called crimes and condemn yourself in front of everyone, the shock of your surrender will create an emotional surge. Core will be so busy gloating, he'll lower his defenses to broadcast your confession to the world." "You want me to just walk in there and tell them I'm the monster they think I am?" Lyra asked, her voice low. "We want you to give them the show they want," the elder replied, "so you can take the one thing they have." Lyra stared at the stone floor, then looked at Ethan, at his empty chest and his cold, logical eyes. "I'll do it," she said. "No," Ethan stated flatly. He moved to stand in front of her. "That plan is unacceptable. You'll be executed. The probability of your survival is 0%. "I'm not doing this to survive, Ethan," Lyra said softly. "I'm doing it to get you to the core." "I don't need my memories back if the price is your life," Ethan argued, his voice gaining an uncharacteristic edge. "That is a terrible trade." Lyra cupped his face in her hands. "Ethan, please, listen to me." She looked right into his eyes, as if searching for the man he used to be. "You think love is about jumping in front of a laser blast," she said. "You think it's about dying for someone. It's not." She gently brushed a damp strand of hair from his forehead. "Love is about proving you can live honestly with someone," she said. "Even when it's hard," she continued, "and even when it hurts. I'm going to testify not to die, but to finally tell the truth. And you're going to be right there to make sure that truth finally matters." She turned back to the elder priest. "Open the door." The tribunal hall was a massive, circular chamber of black obsidian and gleaming gold. Thousands of dignitaries filled the tiered seats, their silence thick with fear. In the very center, standing on a floating platform, was Chancellor Mile Kor. Behind him, the harmonizing engine loomed, a gigantic tuning fork that vibrated with a frequency that you could feel in your bones. "And so you see," Kor shouted, his arms spread wide. "Chaos is the natural state of the unguided mind. But today, we bring order." The huge doors at the far end of the hall groaned open, and every head in the room turned. Lyra Saurin walked in. She had no armor, no weapon. She was wearing a torn dress, but her head was held high. Ethan followed a single step behind her, his face an emotionless mask. "Chancellor!" Lyra's voice was like a clear bell, cutting through the silence. Kor froze mid-speech, then a so-cruel smile spread across his lips. He waved his guards down. "Well, well," Kor purred, his voice dripping with condescension. "The traitor has returned. Have you come to beg for a quick end, Lyra?" "I've come to testify," she answered, marching steadily toward the platform. "You wanted a villain, Mile? Here I am." She stopped right at the foot of his stage. She looked past him, at the broadcast cameras, at the millions of people watching from across the planet. "My name is Lyra Saurin," she declared. "I was a key. I opened minds for the council. I stole secrets for them. I crushed anyone who disagreed with them. I did it all because I was afraid." A wave of murmurs washed over the crowd. "But I'm not afraid anymore," she said, her voice growing stronger. "And neither is he." She pointed directly at Ethan. He stepped forward. He could feel the weight of thousands of eyes on him. He could feel the hollow space where his heart should be. But he could also feel the small crystal in his pocket, the resonance stone they'd imprinted on the moon. He wrapped his hand around it. "Remember," he told himself, "not the face, the feeling." He squeezed his eyes shut. He forced his mind to bypass the broken pathways and go directly to the raw sensation stored inside that stone. He tugged at the thread of memory, the sticky heat of the jungle, the scent of ozone in the air, the terrifying, wonderful feeling of being truly seen by someone. He didn't just remember it, he breathed it in. The reconstruction was brutal. It felt like his ribs were cracking apart from the inside. Ethan cried out, stumbling to one knee as the missing pieces of his soul flooded back in. The gray, colorless world he'd been living in exploded into vibrant color. The love he felt for Lyra didn't just return, it slammed into him like a tidal wave. He looked up and saw her, really saw her, and he remembered everything. He knew why she was worth it all. She was the only person in the universe who had ever made him feel real. Ethan pushed himself back to his feet. He looked straight at my core. "You're lying, Chancellor," Ethan said. His voice was no longer the flat, robotic tone from the news reports. It was full, clear, and crackling with anger. "Ah, the human speaks," Kor sneered. "Tell us, envoy, do you not want the peace we are offering?" "No," Ethan shot back, "and neither do you." He turned from the Chancellor and faced the crowd. He ignored the Veyrons and looked directly at the human delegates, at Director Vance, who was trying to shrink into his seat in the front row. "We are not victims here!" Ethan shouted. "Look at us! My own government tried to buy this technology. We didn't come here seeking peace. We came here to buy a weapon!" The entire room erupted into chaos. This was not part of the show. Humans were supposed to be the helpless children, not partners in crime. "We are not perfect," Ethan roared over the rising din. "We're greedy and we're scared. We make terrible choices because we're terrified of losing what little power we have. But that's what makes us who we are. You can't just harmonize that away, you can only bury it." Mailcor's face was a mask of pure rage. He had completely lost control of the narrative. The audience wasn't hypnotized. They were listening to Ethan. "Enough!" Kor screamed, his voice cracking. "Activate the wave! Now!" He slammed his palm down on the control panel. The massive engine behind him let out a piercing shriek. A visible wave of energy pulsed outward, physically knocking the dignitaries in the front rows from their seats. It was a sound that wasn't a sound. It was a psychic command. Sleep. Obey. Agree. Ethan felt his own mind begin to buckle under the immense pressure, a physical weight trying to crush his thoughts into dust. "Lyra!" Ethan yelled, grabbing her hand. "The core! Now!" The distraction had paid off. In his rage, Kor had unlocked all the systems to broadcast his wave. The hidden door behind the throne was completely exposed. Lyra didn't hesitate. She pulled him forward, dragging him with her. The floor was vibrating violently, the entire palace groaning as the wave fought to rewrite the planet's reality. They scrambled up onto the platform, past the screaming chancellor, and threw themselves against the smooth, golden wall behind his throne. Lyra hummed a broken, desperate note, the command frequency. The wall slid silently open. The second they tumbled inside, the world went dead silent. They were in the heart of the palace, but this place was nothing like the other rooms. This was the source. The core was a vast cavern of living crystal that pulsed with the slow, deep rhythm of a heartbeat. At its center, a pool of pure white light swirled like a captured star. "It's awake," Lyra whispered, her eyes locked on the light. "It feels ancient." Outside, their world was ending. The psychic wave was spreading, washing over the city and extinguishing millions of minds. "We have to reverse it," Ethan said, stumbling toward the pool. "Turn it from a receiver into a transmitter." "It needs a key," Lyra said, her gaze never leaving the pool. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She didn't look back at Ethan with sadness, but with a fierce, blinding joy. "The room wants to heal," she said, her voice clear. "It's been forced to torture people for centuries. It's in pain. Ethan, it just needs permission to stop." She took a step toward the edge of the light. "Lyra, wait!" Ethan cried out, reaching for her. She turned, her face illuminated. "The crystal, Ethan. The imprint." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the glowing stone, the one that held their truth. She took it from him and pressed it to her heart. "I'm not the key for control anymore," she whispered to the room, to the light, to the universe itself. "I'm the invitation." She met Ethan's eyes one last time. "Live truthfully," she commanded him softly. Then she stepped into the light. She didn't burn. She dissolved. Her physical body unraveled into ribbons of pure luminance. She became the signal. She took the crystal, the memory of their shared vulnerability, the proof that empathy was stronger than fear, and fed it into the amplifier. Ethan screamed her name. The room didn't explode with fire. It exploded with feeling. The shockwave of pure emotion blasted out of the palace, moving faster than light, faster than sound. It slammed into the harmonizing wave and shattered it to pieces. Across the city, across the entire planet, Every living being gasped as one. They didn't feel pain. They didn't feel a command. They felt her. They felt the sensation of a hand holding theirs in the dark. They felt the terror of being truly known and the overwhelming relief of being accepted anyway. They felt the undeniable crushing weight of the truth. The council had been hurting them, using them, draining them. It wasn't a thought. It was a shared experience. 1 billion people suddenly remembered what it felt like to be free, because for a fleeting moment, they were all feeling Lyra Saurin's heart beating inside their own chests. In the now empty room, Ethan fell to his knees. The light was gone. The pool was dark, Lyra was gone. But the oppressive silence in his head was gone too. In its place was a rising chorus, the sound of an entire world waking up. The light in the core didn't just fade. It felt like it let out a long, final breath. The blinding white intensity that had swallowed Lyra whole spiraled down into the central pool like water down a drain. Ethan stayed on his knees, shielding his eyes, waiting for the psychic silence to rush back in. But it never came. Instead, the floor beneath him began to vibrate with a sound he felt deep in his bones. A low, chaotic thrumming. It was the sound of a planet waking from a nightmare and realizing it had been screaming the whole time. "Lyra!" Ethan shouted, his voice cracking as he scrambled toward the edge of the dark pool. For a terrifying second, he saw only the glassy, smooth surface of the liquid crystal. Then the surface broke. Lyra burst out, gasping for air, her silver hair plastered to her face. She hauled herself onto the ledge, coughing up a fluid that glowed faintly before turning into clear water. She was shaking violently, her skin flashing with a storm of clashing colors, red, gold, bruised purple, before finally settling into a pale, exhausted white. "You're alive," Ethan breathed, grabbing her arms and pulling her the rest of the way onto the floor. "You dissolved. I saw you." "I was the signal," Lyra rasped, leaning her forehead against his chest. Her skin was burning hot. "I went into the network. I felt everyone." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and haunted. "They're awake, Ethan. The wave is broken, but Mylar Core, he pulled the failsafe." Ethan looked around. The golden walls of the chamber were cracking, with spiderwebs of fissures racing across their surfaces. The palace wasn't made of stone. It was built from psychoreactive matter. It needed the population's collective stability to hold its shape. With everyone in emotional chaos, the palace was literally having a nervous breakdown. "We have to go," Lyra said, stumbling to her feet. "The Chancellor, I saw him in the stream. He has the seed drive." "The what?" "A portable core," she explained, dragging Ethan toward the exit just as a huge piece of the ceiling crashed down behind them. "It holds the base algorithm for the wave. If he gets off-world, he can plug it into any relay station in the sector. He can start the whole nightmare over again from a safe distance. He's heading for the High Spire." They ran. The palace corridors had become a landscape of nightmares. The walls rippled like disturbed water, forming faces that screamed silently before melting away. Gravity shifted wildly. 1 second Ethan felt as heavy as lead. The next he was bounding like he was on the moon, fighting to keep his boots on the floor. They burst out onto the skyport landing deck. The storm outside had gotten worse, with purple lightning tearing the sky apart. The wind was a solid wall, screaming across the open platform. Across the rain-slicked deck, a sleek, needle-nosed ship was powering up for launch. Its engines flared with a blue-white ion fire that vaporized the rain before it could even touch the hull. Mylar Core stood at the bottom of the ramp, clutching a silver device to his chest. He looked like a madman, his robes torn, his usual composure completely gone. He shouted something into the storm, a curse or a prayer, and turned to board. "Stop him!" Lyra screamed. She didn't reach for a weapon. She reached out with her mind, grabbing loose cargo crates, maintenance drones, anything she could find, and hurled them at the ship. Core spun around and saw them. He raised a hand, and the ship's defensive turret swiveled to meet them. Ethan tackled Lyra, and the deck where they'd been standing erupted in laser fire. They slid behind a heavy fuel pod, the metal growing hot as the energy beams hammered against it. "He's launching!" Ethan yelled over the noise. Lyra risked a look at the ship, then at the docking clamps. They were retracting. "We have to get on board," she said. "Are you insane?" Ethan shot back, wiping rain from his eyes. "That's a hostile ship!" "It's the only way to stop the seed," Lyra insisted, grabbing his hand. "Trust the jump." They broke from cover. The turrets fired again, but Lyra threw up a shield of pure kinetic noise, a shimmering bubble of distortion that bent the lasers just enough. They sprinted across the gap as the ship began to rise. The ramp was closing. "Jump!" Lyra commanded. They leaped. Ethan's fingers scraped against the edge of the rising ramp. He slipped, his legs dangling over a 1,000-foot drop into the churning ocean below. Lyra grabbed his wrist. She was lying flat on the ramp, her boots hooked into the metal grating to keep from sliding off. She pulled, her face twisted with the effort. Ethan scrambled up, rolling onto the deck just as the ramp sealed shut with a final hiss of pressurization. They were inside. The interior of Mylor's ship was nothing like the palace. It was cold, sterile, and clearly expensive. But as the ship punched through the atmosphere, rattling through the storm's turbulence, the walls began to shift. "The ship is linked to Kor's mind," Lyra whispered, bracing herself against a bulkhead. "He's panicking. The reality filters are failing." Suddenly, the floor dissolved from under them. Ethan yelled, flailing, but he didn't fall. He was floating in a void. The corridor was gone. He was standing in an office, his old office, back on Earth. The smell of coffee and old books filled his nose. Warm yellow Earth sun streamed through the window. He was sitting in his chair, wearing a crisp suit. There was no war. There was no Vera. Ethan blinked. He picked up a data pad from the desk. It was a commendation for his service. 5 years of peace, it read. Promotion granted. It was perfect. It was safe. It was the life he thought he wanted before he ever stepped on that shuttle. "Ethan," a voice called. He looked up. A woman stood in the doorway, a pretty generic human woman, smiling warmly. She was holding 2 tickets to a show. "Come on, Ethan," she said softly. "The work is done. You're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Just sit down. Just accept it." Ethan looked at the woman, then at the sunlight. He felt the pull of it, the siren's call of a life without the terrifying highs and lows of the last few days. A life where he didn't have to bleed. He closed his eyes. "This isn't real," he said softly. "It can be," the woman said, her smile wavering just a little. "Just let go of the pain. Let go of her. She's too much trouble, Ethan. She breaks things." Ethan opened his eyes. "She does break things," he agreed, standing up. "She broke the cage I was living in." He picked up the coffee mug from his desk and hurled it at the window. The illusion shattered with the glass. The sunlight, the office, everything dissolved into digital static. Ethan fell forward, landing hard on the cold metal deck of the ship. A few feet away, Lyra was on her knees, screaming. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, clutching her head. "I did it. I take it all back." "Lyra!" Ethan shouted, crawling toward her. She looked at him, but her eyes looked straight through him. She was lost inside a beautiful lie. "They're forgiving me," she whispered, tears carving paths down her cheeks. "The council, the people, they're all cheering for me. They're saying it was necessary. They're calling me a saint. I don't have to be the monster, Ethan. I can be the hero. All I have to do is agree it was for the greater good." She reached out, her hand extended to an invisible, adoring crowd, her face shining with pure relief. "Lyra, you have to listen to me," Ethan shouted, grabbing her by the shoulders. He gave her a shake. It's not real. You are not a saint. Lyra blinked, and the light in her eyes flickered. But it hurts so much, she whimpered. The guilt, it's killing me. I know, Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. That's how you know it's real. You did those things, Lyra. You hurt all those people. You can't just wish that away. You have to live with it. Lyra just stared at him. The temptation to just sink back into that warm, comforting illusion was almost unbearable. To believe, just for a moment, that she was innocent. But then she saw Ethan's face, bruised, slick with rain, his eyes filled with a painful, brutal honesty. I'm not a hero, she whispered, her voice finding its strength again. She squeezed her eyes shut. I'm a key, she said, and I'm the one who unlocked the door. She let out a scream, a single, jarring note that was pure rejection. The world around her, the cheering crowds, the falling confetti, erupted into flames and then vanished. They were back on the ship. The gravity slammed back on with a gut-wrenching lurch. The bridge! Lyra gasped, wiping her face. He's on the bridge! They scrambled up the last ladder. The door to the flight deck hung open, and there, at the helm, stood Mile Kor. He wasn't even looking at the view screen, where stars streaked past like brilliant lines of paint. He was staring at the silver, seed-like device plugged directly into the ship's navigation computer. It's uploading, Kor muttered, his back still to them. The relay is in range. We'll start over. We'll get it right this time. No variables. No more variables. Chancellor! Lyra yelled. Kor turned around. He looked ancient, his skin a pasty gray, his eyes sunken and hollow. The psychic shockwave from the planet's awakening had sucked him dry. You, he hissed. You shattered the song. Can you hear them? They're screaming. They're lost. They need a leader. Lyra, they need to make their own mistakes now, she shot back, stepping onto the bridge. You're not a leader, Mile. You're a puppet master, and your puppets just cut their own strings. Kor let out a dry, rattling laugh. Freedom. You think this is freedom? You've given them chaos. You've given them pain. And soon, they're going to hate you for it. He lifted one hand. The very air on the bridge felt like it was turning to syrup. The illusions were back, but this time, they were weapons. Ethan watched in horror as the walls of the ship sharpened into rows of jagged teeth. The floor dissolved into a writhing pit of snakes. Kor was broadcasting pure, primal fear. Submit! Kor's voice boomed, echoing like a god's. There is no truth but order. There is no pleasure but obedience. To know yourself is to know suffering. Ethan felt his knees start to give out, the sheer force of that logic hammering against his mind. It was so simple, so tempting. Just stop fighting. Stop thinking. Just be. He glanced at Lyra. She was on her knees, struggling, her own mental defenses cracking under Kor's assault. In that moment, Ethan knew he couldn't win a psychic war. He didn't have that kind of power. But he had something else. He was a linguist. He understood how ideas were built. Kor was using a kind of circular logic, a mental trap that made you believe safety could only be found in silence. Ethan forced himself to his feet. He made his brain focus not on the fear, but on the grammar of the attack. Kor! Ethan yelled. The Chancellor glanced at him with a sneer. Be silent, human. You are a discordant note. Ethan took a step forward. You say pleasure is obedience, he shouted, his voice slicing through the psychic noise. You say connection demands a single will. It is the law of the universe, Kor roared back. Two frequencies cannot share the same space without creating chaos. That's a lie, Ethan yelled, pulling on every lesson Lyra had ever taught him, every desperate moment of the last few days. Harmony isn't one voice singing alone, Ethan declared. Harmony is the beautiful tension between two notes that refuse to become one another. The ship groaned. The teeth on the walls flickered. Kor stumbled back a step. The very logic of his illusion was starting to break. Ethan had found a paradox, a flaw in the mind control syntax that it couldn't compute. If you control the song, it's not music. Ethan pressed, getting closer. It's just noise. Consent is the only frequency that can last. Without choice, your perfect order is just chaos wearing a mask. No! Kor shrieked, clutching his head. The logic! It is flawless! It's dead! Ethan yelled. And then he spoke the final phrase, a linguistic kill switch he'd pieced together in the hangar, weaponizing the idea of zero, a concept that didn't exist in Kor's resonance language. Your silence is empty. The illusion shattered. The walls snapped back to solid metal. The snakes were gone! Kor collapsed against the console, gasping for air, his mental power broken by the simple, undeniable truth Ethan had spoken. Lyra didn't waste a second. She lunged forward. She didn't attack him. She went straight for the silver seed device on the console. She ripped it free, sending a shower of sparks across the deck. No! Kor scrambled for her, but Ethan was already moving. He tackled the Chancellor, slamming his shoulder into the old man's chest. They crashed to the floor. Kor was weak now, his strength spent on the illusion. Ethan easily pinned him down. Lyra raced to the airlock's disposal chute. She shoved the device inside and slammed the activation button. The outer hatch cycled open and shut. The device was gone, ejected into the silent void of space. She turned back to the nav computer and blasted it with a burst of resonance. "Ship!" Lyra commanded. "Land now!" The ship groaned as the engines violently reversed thrust. Ethan held Kor down as the Chancellor began to weep, not for his own life, but for the perfect, silent world he had just lost. The landing was anything but graceful. They crashed into a soft, marshy delta about 10 miles from the capital city. The ship tore a path through mud and trees before finally grinding to a halt in a cloud of steam. Ethan and Lyra stumbled out of the wreckage, dragging a defeated Mile Corps between them. They weren't met by an army. They were met by a mob. Citizens of Vera, farmers, merchants, artists, surrounded the crash site. They all looked dazed. Some were crying, others were shouting. They were feeling the raw, unfiltered chaos of their own emotions for the first time in centuries. When they saw Kor, a single, unified roar went up. It was an ugly sound, the sound of pure vengeance. Ethan immediately stepped in front of the fallen Chancellor. "No!" he shouted, holding up his hands. "We are not tearing him apart!" "Why the hell not?" a woman screamed, her eyes burning with rage. "He stole my entire life!" "Because if you kill him like this, you're just reacting!" Ethan yelled back. "You're just doing what the anger is telling you to do. That's just another kind of slavery." He looked out at the sea of angry faces. "You want to be free? Then you have to choose justice. You have to choose it even when it's hard. Put him on trial. Make him listen to your stories. Don't let him turn you into murderers too." The crowd wavered. The logic hit them. It was the same lesson Lyra had taught him. Dealing with pain takes courage, not more violence. Slowly the mob began to part. Peacekeepers, the ones who had already woken up, moved in and took Kor into custody. Lyra stood beside Ethan, watching them lead the Chancellor away. She looked completely drained, her natural glow dim. "You're a pretty good diplomat, Ethan Vale," she whispered. "I had a great teacher," he said, leaning against her for support. The weeks that followed weren't some fairy tale ending. They were an absolute mess. The collapse of the harmonizing wave didn't create a perfect utopia overnight. It created what everyone started calling the Great Noise. The society fractured. Factions popped up everywhere. Some wanted to bring back the council, others wanted total anarchy, and some were trying to build a democracy from scratch. Millions of relationships built on a lie, just dissolved. Families fell apart. The economy completely collapsed. And humanity wasn't spared either. The news that coalition leaders had tried to buy the mind control technology caused a scandal that brought down the entire government. Director Vance was arrested. Earth was in chaos. Ethan and Lyra sat on the balcony of the same safe house in the museum where they'd hidden before. The ancient stone statues watched over them. Lyra was packing a small bag. "Where are you going?" Ethan asked from the doorway. Lyra didn't look up. "Away. The Outer Rim, maybe. There's a colony out there that needs healers." "Why?" "Because look at this place, Ethan," she said, waving a hand at the city below them, which was dark in some places and burning in others. "I did this. I'm the face of this revolution, but I was also part of the old regime. When they look at me, they see the key. They see the woman who unlocked their minds without ever asking for permission." She zipped the bag shut. "And you're a hero now. The coalition is going to give you your job back. You can go home to Earth. You can have that office with all the sunlight. You can have a normal life." Ethan walked over to her. He put his hand on her bag, stopping her. "I don't want a normal life," he said softly. "Ethan, please," Lyra said, her voice cracking. "I'm trying to protect you. Being with me will never be easy. I'm carrying 1,000 years of my people's trauma. I'm a mess. I'm dangerous." Ethan gently took the bag from her hand and set it on the floor. "You're deciding for me again," he said. "You're trying to write the story where I'm safe and you get to be noble." He took both of her hands in his. "Stop it. Stop trying to control the ending." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes welling with tears. "Then what do you want?" "I want to choose," Ethan said, stepping closer. "With you. I know it's going to be messy," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know we're going to fight. And I know there will be days we'll look at each other and only see the scars. But that's the real work, isn't it? I don't want some perfect illusion of safety, Lyra. I want the messy, complicated reality of you." He took a breath, and in that moment he looked completely exposed. "I'm asking you to stay, not because of fate or destiny, just because I'm asking." Lyra scanned his face, searching for a hint of doubt, a flicker of fear. All she found was the steady, stubborn beat of his heart. A breath she'd been holding since she was a little girl finally escaped her lips in a long, slow sigh. "Okay," she whispered. Then a small, fragile smile touched her lips, but it was the most real thing she'd ever felt. "Okay." "Okay," she repeated, a little stronger this time. "I choose you, too." The next morning, Lyra led him back to the palace. Most of it was still a ruin, but the hidden chamber behind the throne had survived untouched. The new government had roped it off, treating it with a kind of superstitious fear, but they parted ways for Lyra. They stood together in the heart of the room. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by a gentle, amber light that felt like a permanent sunrise. "Why did you bring me here?" Ethan asked. "Because this is where it all began," Lyra answered, turning toward the empty basin where the entity's light used to be. "I'm not your teacher anymore, Ethan. My time as your guide is over." She faced him directly. "From now on, this room isn't for holding secrets. It's for finding the truth. And I will never use my resonance on you again unless you ask me to," she added, taking a small step back to give them space. "That's the vow," she said. "No more shortcuts. No more reading minds to skip the hard conversations. We're going to do this the hard way, with words, with trust." Ethan looked around the room, feeling the faint warmth that still lingered in the walls, as if the space itself was waiting. He then looked at Lyra. "I have a request," he said. Lyra tilted her head. "Yes?" A slow, genuine smile spread across Ethan's face. "Teach me how to say, 'I love you,' in High Veyron without accidentally declaring war on a goat." Lyra burst out laughing. The sound filled the chamber, and the room seemed to amplify it, turning it into a beautiful chime that echoed through the palace's very foundations. "It's a tricky dialect," she teased, melting into his arms. "But I think you've got a knack for it." And then Ethan kissed her. The room didn't explode in a flash of light. It didn't broadcast their memories for the world to see. It just held the space for them, quiet and warm, letting them be two people simply holding on to each other. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Treaty of Reciprocity was signed in the Great Hall. It was a landmark document filled with trade agreements and new border maps. But its very first article was unlike anything in galactic history: the right to cognitive privacy. It officially banned the non-consensual use of resonance technology and established the Veyron mental arts as a protected, regulated medical practice. Ethan Vale sat in the back row, watching the historic moment unfold. He wasn't a low-level envoy anymore. He was now ambassador to Veyron, the first human to ever hold the post who could actually speak the language fluently. He looked for Lyra. She wasn't on the grand stage with the dignitaries. Instead, she stood near a side entrance, dressed in the simple robes of a healer. The secret room had been open to everyone. It was now known as the Sanctuary of the Core. Humans and Veyron alike came there, veterans of the psychic wars, families torn apart and hoping to reconnect, lovers trying to build a bridge across species. Lyra worked there. She didn't use the room to change memories anymore. She used it to help people hold them. She would sit with them in the quiet light, helping them carry the weight of their past until they were strong enough to bear it on their own. Her eyes scanned the crowd and met Ethan's from across the hall. She didn't send a thought. She didn't have to. She just smiled, and he smiled back. It was a tiny, simple moment, completely invisible to the reporters and historians capturing the big event. But as Ethan got up and walked out of the hall to meet her, he knew that quiet smile was the most important victory of them all. They stepped out into the city together. The storms had finally passed. The setting sun painted the crystal towers in brilliant shades of orange and gold. It wasn't a perfect world. There was still prejudice, still fear. 1,000 new problems were waiting to be solved. But as Ethan took Lyra's hand in his, he felt no desire to escape any of it. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. She squeezed back. He realized then that real intimacy wasn't about hiding from the world together. It was about finding the courage to face it, side by side. And pleasure wasn't a weakness to be ashamed of. It was the simple truth that remained after all the lies had burned away. As they walked together into the chaotic, beautiful noise of their future, Ethan Vale was, for the first time in his life, completely and utterly unafraid.